This is an orientation to provide you with information about the course History and Literature of Ancient Israel. We'll be briefly looking at the syllabus to help you understand what the course will be covering and what the expectations are for you as a student. The course description says that this course provides an introduction to and overview of the history and literature of the Old Testament. Students will be introduced to basic resources and methodologies for study. Relationship and significance of the Old Testament to the New Testament and the church will be emphasized. So this is basically an Old Testament survey course in which you are learning about and seeing a big picture view of all of the books of the Old Testament. The course outcomes are what we want you to know or be able to do by the end of the course. And that includes, number 1, explain key figures, events, themes, cultural matters, and critical issues of the Old Testament from a Christian perspective and a Jewish perspective. So there will be some Jewish material in the course. It's primarily coming from a Hasidic viewpoint, which is a conservative sect of Judaism, but the inclusion of it is to broaden your understanding of the Jewish view. It doesn't mean that we necessarily endorse or agree with that view. Number 2, analyze the ways in which the Old Testament scriptures testify of Jesus. So this is one of the underlying themes of this course, is that the Old Testament relates to the New Testament. The Old Testament scriptures are about Jesus. They testify of him. And so this will be one of the themes that's going to be running throughout this course. Number 3, develop an Old Testament theology. This is the other main theme underlying this course. A theology is really, it's kind of like a theme would be a synonym, but it means what is the unifying idea or theme or theology that underlies the entire Old Testament. There are some liberal scholars who like to analyze each book independently, and they view the Old Testament as being a combination of writings from different people during different time periods and in different geographic and different social circumstances and cultural differences. And that's true. However, we believe that as the Word of God, there is a unity to the Old Testament. And so what is presented in this class is an idea that was initially proposed by Walter Kaiser Jr., who was an Old Testament scholar, that the unifying theology of the Old Testament, what ties it all together, is the promised plan of God, the plan of redemption of God that progressively unfolds through the Old Testament. So you'll be learning about that in this class. And those two themes will be consistently addressed in each of the units. And then also number 4 is to utilize Bible tools such as a handbook, concordance, Bible dictionary, and atlas. Some of you may be familiar with these tools, but if not, we want to provide just an introduction to them so that they can enrich your Bible study. So in terms of coursework, there are required readings and lectures. These are your core resources that you'll have every week. Readings will come directly from the Bible. And then also, some of them you'll be scanning, some of them you'll be reading in detail. And then also you have 2 books. One is by Jason DeRoshi, What the Old Testament Authors Really Cared About. And this particular textbook is a survey of the Old Testament. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with everything in the book, but he really provides a nice overview of the Old Testament. He highlights important events and themes and does it in a very interesting, what I feel is somewhat of a passionate way. So it's not a dry, boring textbook. And it really has a lot of excellent information in it. Be sure not to just read the main text, but read all of the supplementary boxes of information and charts that are included in the text as well. And then there's a book by Dan Seagraves called Reading Between the Lines, Discovering Christ in the Old Testament. So this book helps us understand how the Old Testament testifies of Jesus. And he is a Oneness Apostolic author. and scholar, and he's providing us the Christological lens to the Old Testament. And then there are lectures in every unit as well. So the readings and the lectures together make up your core resources. And then in each unit, you'll be having a threaded discussion. We're looking for at least 3 or more posts each week. The first one, part 1, is your initial thread. You'll read the prompt, and then in 150 to 200 words, you're going to write a response and post that. Start a new thread and write your response to the prompt. You do need to make this post by Thursday night, by midnight Pacific time, or by 11:59 p.m. Pacific time or earlier. You're welcome to post it on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, but definitely by Thursday night at the latest. And so part of the score depends on that you have written something that responded to the prompt in a substantive way, that it was the proper length, it was well written, and it met the deadline. Those are the types of criteria we're looking for. In terms of substance, make sure that you're really answering the prompt. It shows that you're either analyzing it or reflecting on this material. Don't just give some cursory, superficial comments, but really think about it. If you've done some outside research, share that with the class. If you already have some knowledge on this subject, share it. If you have questions you want to ask, share that as well, and hopefully one of your classmates or your instructor will respond so that you can get some discussion going. So the first one is your initial response, and then also you need to respond to 2 or more of your other students or fellow students, hopefully more, but at least 2 fellow students. Those are shorter, just 75 to 100 words, and you have until Sunday night to post those. So if your initial thread is on Thursday and your other 2 responses are on another day, then at a minimum, you're going to be posting on 2 different days during the week. We'd love for you to post on more days and respond to more than 2 students, but that's the minimum. So we're looking for a total of 3 responses on at least 2 different days during the week. And then making sure that your responses are substantive, they meet the required length, they're well written, and they meet the deadlines. And then in each unit, there will be activities. These are flashcards that will help you study key terminology. And then there are also quizzes. There are 10 questions. They're multiple choice. They're not timed, and you can do them as many times as you want. They do not count towards the overall grade. So the flashcards and the quizzes are for you to practice the material each week. It says they're automatically scored. That's for you to know how you did on them, but the scores don't count towards the grade. And then also for practice in each unit, there will be exercises. They should take about an hour altogether to do. So if there's 2 of them, then they're roughly 30 minutes each. If there are 3 of them, then they're roughly 20 minutes each. But about an hour per week should be spent on the exercises, where you're using the concepts or skills that you've learned in that particular lesson. They're self-assessed, so they don't count toward the final grade for the course. Now, self-assessed means that we've provided you with a sample answer. So what you should do is read the instructions and do the exercises yourself, and then check your work against the sample answers or sample responses that we've provided for you. And in that way, then you're getting a chance to practice and work with the information you're learning, but then you can self-assess how you did on that exercise by comparing it with the sample. So the activities, the quizzes, and the exercises don't go towards the grade, but they're a really important way of reinforcing the information that you've studied in the core resources. Now, there are some areas that are scored. One of those is with assignments. In units 2, 4, and 6, you'll be completing an assignment for further study. Each assignment should take approximately 6 hours to complete. So in units 2, 4, and 6, plan that your schoolwork's going to take a little bit longer in those weeks. The assignments are scored by the instructor, and they do count toward the final grade for the course. And detailed step-by-step instructions are in each of those units. So those ones are scored. Make sure you do the assignments in units 2, 4, and 6. Then there's also a pre-final exam. The final exam is comprehensive. It covers everything from units 1 to 8. It consists of 50 multiple choice questions. And so roughly 6 to 7 questions pertain to each unit so that it's spread evenly. Now the pre-final then is your chance to basically take a practice exam. It also covers units 1 to 8. It's 50 questions. You do need to pass the pre-final in order to open up the final exam. So we're hopeful you're going to earn a 60% or higher, and then that opens up the final exam. It is closed book, it's untimed, it doesn't count towards your final score, but it is a trigger for the final exam. So it's a way for you to get a practice to kind of make sure that you're understanding the material and grasping it, and that you're ready for the final exam. And the final exam is also 50 multiple choice questions testing material from units 1 to 8. It's closed book, and you will have 2 hours to complete the final exam. So make sure that you've passed the pre-final and maybe done some additional studying in the areas that you may, if there were any areas you didn't do well in, give those some additional study, and then you'll be prepared to take the final exam. You will see some overlap of content in the 2 tests, but typically questions are not worded exactly the same way. But for example, if one of the questions relates to the tabernacle, then on the final, then there's probably a tabernacle question on the pre-final. If there's a question about the Davidic covenant on the final, then there's probably a question about the Davidic covenant on the pre-final. But it may not be worded the same way, and it may be testing a different aspect of that piece of information or that topic. So there's definitely a correlation, but they're not exact. But if you do well on the pre-final, you should do well on the final. And then last is a final project. This is due at the end of Unit 8. It is extensive, so it'll take about 20 hours to complete. Therefore, we have provided the instructions in Unit 1. Please read those and begin previewing those so you can prepare. If you wait and anticipate that you'll complete the whole final project in Unit 8, you can do that, but that's going to make a really difficult week. So ideally, plan ahead and start preparing for that final project before Unit 8. So read the instructions in Unit 1 to get prepared for it. And then this section is just the estimated time to completion for each of the different parts of the course. Everybody's different, but these are just rough numbers of what approximately how much time each component of the course should take to complete. And then in terms of course evaluation, there are 4 items that are roughly each a quarter of the grade, approximately. So your threaded discussions in every unit, they're 30 points each altogether. And so that's 240 points for the course. Your assignments that are due in 2, 4, and 6, they're 80 points each for 240 points total. The final exam due in Unit 8 is worth 250 points, and the final project due in Unit 8 is worth 270 points. So those 4 things are really important. Each one of them is about a quarter of the grade. And then in terms of due dates and extensions, threaded discussions are not accepted late. So if you post anything after Sunday night of the week when they're due, they won't be accepted. And that's because most of the value of the assignment has been lost if you aren't posting and reading your your fellow students' posts in the assigned week. It's undermining the opportunity for discussion. So threaded discussions are not accepted past the Sunday night deadline. Even your initial post, if you miss the Thursday night deadline, you'll lose some points, but still do the initial post. There will be some loss of points for being late, but at least get it in. And then make sure you've got a total of 3 or more by Sunday night. And then assignments, they lose 10% per day for up to 7 days, and then they won't be accepted after 7 days. So really try to make sure everything is turned in on time. Assignments are due by the Sunday night around just before midnight Pacific time. And then the final exam and the final project, they cannot be turned in late because they're due the final Sunday night of the final day of class, in the final week of class. And after that, the course is over and it's the instructor's grading period. So the final exam and the final project cannot be submitted late. Now, on the assignments, if you have reasons of personal hardship, and they really have to be extenuating circumstances, not just that you fell behind or you had other fun things you wanted to do and didn't get to your schoolwork, they really have to be legitimate reasons that you need an extension. Make sure you request those with the faculty member before the due date. Don't be late and then the instructor contacts you to say, hey, I noticed you missed this assignment. Now they're encouraging you to still submit it so you get some points, but unless you got pre-approval, there will be a loss of points for lateness, but it's still better than a 0. As long as you're within a week on your assignments, get them turned in so you can get some of the points. And then typically your work will be graded within 1 week of submission. So then the remainder of the syllabus, the next section has the course schedule. This allows you to see what's happening in each unit and kind of anticipate what's coming, since each unit just opens up in the particular week to which it pertains. All of the core resources are aligned to particular outcomes, so you can see what we're wanting you to learn from that material. And the core resources are the combinations of readings and lectures, and then you can see the prompt for the threaded discussion. So what's nice is that if you decide to read ahead, you can also see what the prompt will be for that future week and kind of anticipate what you might share in that discussion for your initial response. So those are some things you can do ahead if you want, are the core resources, as primarily the readings, and then also preparing maybe ahead for a future threaded discussion, even though you can't post until the actual week when it's assigned. And then for the unit review, you'll have the flashcards as an activity, you have the quiz, and then there are 2 to 3 exercises in each unit. So that's the layout of each of the course, and of each of the units of the course. Unit number 1, just to give you the big picture, is the overview of the Old Testament. So we're talking about the overarching divine design of the Bible, introducing how the Old Testament scriptures testify about Jesus. We're also talking about why the Bible is truthful and reliable, because that's a really important foundation to have before we study the Word. And then looking at credible sources of biblical information. We're wanting to prepare you to start doing some research. Unit number 2 is the law. This course does follow the sequence of Deroshi's book, which is also the sequence of the Hebrew Bible, which divides the Old Testament into the law, the prophets, and the writings. So unit number 2 is part 1 of the law. And also in unit 2, you'll have your first assignment. And then unit number 3 is the law, part 2. Unit number 4 is part 1 of the prophets, which are the former prophets. And again, we're using terminology that would be a Jewish perspective of the terminology. The prophets in an English Bible are typically divided by major prophets and minor prophets, not because of the importance of the prophets, but because of the length of their writing. So the major prophets wrote lengthier pieces than the minor prophets, which were shorter. And then again, in unit 4, you're going to have an assignment. We aren't specifically studying the tabernacle. I think there's some information in the Deroshi book about it, but this one will be a research paper. So you're going to be having to do some outside research. But it's really neat because it will tie into what you're seeing with types and shadows of the Old Testament testifying of Jesus. How does the tabernacle relate to the plan of redemption and testify of Jesus? And then unit 5 is the latter prophets. And again, in each one of these units, you'll be seeing that theme. For example, unit 6 is a good example where we talk about the 12. One part is just understanding the key figures, events, themes, cultural matters, and critical issues in the different books that are being covered in that unit. And you're also looking at the ways that those particular books testify about Jesus, and then you're looking at the theology of promise in those books. So those are those underlying themes that we're looking at every single unit, which is preparing you for the final project. And then in Unit 6, there's a 3-page research paper about one of the prophets. So you get to choose one to write about. Unit 7 covers the former writings. And then Unit 8 covers the latter writings. So make sure that each unit you're using the core resources of your readings and lectures, you're participating in a threaded discussion, and then you're doing the review items of the flashcards, the quizzes, and the exercises. And then in 2, 4, and 6, you're doing the assignments. And then at the end, in Unit 8, there will be the link for the pre-final exam, and the link for the final exam, and the link for the final project. Just to give you a little preview on the final project, it consists of 2 parts. One is a research paper regarding God's promise plan as the unifying theology of the Old Testament. So I highly recommend you utilize your course resources, but you're going to be writing a brief paper about the theme or theology of promise as the concept that unifies the Old Testament. And we've provided that theme throughout the entire course. So you've got your course materials to rely on, and you can also, or will need to bring in some outside research as well, with at least a couple more resources to enhance what you've studied. And then part 2 involves developing, teaching, and reflecting on a Bible study about how the Old Testament testifies of Jesus. So in part 2, you're going to be taking what you've learned about how we see Jesus in the Old Testament, and you're going to be preparing a 30 to 40-minute Bible study. That seems like a long time, but it actually goes by really fast. So you're going to study and synthesize the notes, plus hopefully add in some outside research about how the Old Testament testifies of Jesus. Prepare it into a lesson, and then you're going to teach that lesson. And then after you teach it, you're going to write a 2-page reflection paper about how did you create your Bible study, and then also report back on how it went teaching it. Now, in terms of who you can teach it to, if you have a preaching ministry, then by all means, please prepare it and teach it over the pulpit. We've had students who have taken this course in the past do that. It has led to incredible altar calls and people getting the Holy Ghost, so it really can be a powerful lesson. If you are a youth pastor or a Sunday school teacher, please feel free to teach it to those groups if it's appropriate, or any Bible study group that you have. If you don't have a preaching or teaching ministry and you're kind of intimidated to teach this lesson, you can do it to someone who is a friend or family, to a small group, or to as few as just one person. So it doesn't have to be an intimidating experience. At practice, what's so important is that we take what we learn and that we learn it well enough to be able to turn around and teach and bless others with that information. So this will be taking the information about the Old Testament, what we know of Jesus and how it relates to him, preparing your notes, teaching it, and then reporting back. And then you'll be submitting your notes, and you'll be submitting the reflection paper about it. So altogether, you're turning in the research paper, and you're turning in part 2 with the Bible study. And a template is provided with you to make it simpler. There's also a rubric so you can see what the detailed expectations are for this assignment. And if you have questions, please be sure to contact your instructor. They should always be your first line of contact. If you need an extension on an assignment, if you have a question about an assignment, they are your first point of contact. So please be sure to be in touch with your instructor. We're excited to have you in this course and hope that you are blessed by all of the information you'll be learning. God bless you in your studies.